All right. Hello, everybody out there in the tubes of the internet, and welcome to This Week in Space. Ooh, yeah. I'm your host with the most, Joan Emerson Bell. I like to show up here every Monday morning at 11-ish a.m. Mountain Time to tell you what's going on in space. I do this live on Instagram, put it up on the YouTube. It comes out as a podcast, so you can check it out however you want to get your astro information. And yeah, if you find this helpful, let some other folks know. It's good to spread the word. I don't know. I just do this because it's part of my practice, but yeah, I'd like to get it out there to anybody who might benefit from this practice. Good morning, Vera. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. So, yeah, we'll be looking at this week in space for March the 23rd. That's today, 2026, through March the 29th of 2026. Good morning. So before I jump into the report, good morning, Jesse Brown. What's up, my friend? Nice to see you. I hope you're feeling better. Um, Before I jump into the astrology of the week, just a couple brief announcements. There will be no wizard report next week, no this week in space. I'm taking uh I'm taking a little bit of a vacation. Your hardest working wizard in show business needs a break. So I'll be taking next Monday off. But I'll be here the following Monday, same wizard time, same wizard channel. Also, I'm going to be co-facilitating an Oracle Dream Retreat in Greece. This will be occurring May 8th through the 15th. And in this retreat, we will visit several ancient sites, including Delphi, which I've never been to. Super excited about. We'll be talking about the mythology of Apollo and Python and solar forces versus chthonic earthly forces and talking about oracular dreaming and the prophecies of Delphi. We'll also go to Epidavros and the temple to Asclepius, which I have been to, which is absolutely amazing. One of my favorite places on earth. And yeah, in this retreat, we'll be exploring the precognitive power of dreams. And if you are interested, you can follow at Sarah Jane's Dreaming on the Instagram and just shoot her a DM, or you can go to the website themysteries.org and check out the Oracle Dream Retreat. There are a couple spaces left, I believe. And if you are interested, if you want to go on a dream odyssey with me and Sarah Janes and some other amazing co-facilitators, check out themysteries.org or DM Sarah Jane's Dreaming on Instagram. And I hope to see you there. Woo! All right, my friends. With all those announcements and advertisements out of the way, let me take a sip of my beverage and let's get into the astrology of the week. So, there aren't too many transits going on this week, which is maybe a nice thing, but the ones that we are getting are maybe a little intense. They bring a sense of depth. The kind of theme of the week is control versus disintegration. And yeah, I'll just get into it. And I've got a lot to say, a lot of stories coming up this week. So let's just see how this goes, shall we? Starting off on Wednesday, March the 25th, we have the Sun in Aries conjunct Saturn in Aries. This is happening at 4 degrees and 34 minutes. And let me share my screen for the folks on the YouTube. Just give me 1 second. All right, bam. There we go. And once this goes away, okay, so we have the sun down here at 4 degrees, 30, 43 arc minutes, and Saturn right there at 4 degrees, 34 arc minutes of Aries. and the sun has just passed the conjunction with Neptune and then coming into the conjunction with Saturn. Good morning, Gina Maria. Um, all right, let me just arrange some windows here. All right, so um, yesterday, March the 22nd, we had the sun's conjunction with Neptune. And last week, I talked about this in the Wizard Report as the kind of alchemical operation of dissolution, which is a process of dissolving. And so this coming Wednesday, we have the sun conjunct Saturn, which brings form to what was dissolved during the sun's conjunction with Neptune. And this brings to mind the alchemical axiom of solve et coagula, which is to dissolve and to coagulate. And I think much of the world sort of functions in this way, the things sort of disintegrating and then coming back into form. It is to let go and to grab on, to allow something to soften and melt, and then to reform that material and to give it substance. And this is the operation or the period that we are all kind of going through on both internal and external levels this week. And I believe that this process will sort of continue on as the sun is activating that Neptune Saturn conjunction, which was exact on February the 20th. But let's talk about the sun's conjunction with Saturn and what that might look like. So Saturn is a symbol of structure and responsibility. It applies pressure and weight. It bestows maturity and authority. The weight that Saturn brings causes us to get real with ourselves. The pressure it applies to our lives helps us to get to the authentic core of who we are. My friend, brilliant playwright Daisy Campbell, said that if you want to know who a character really is, just keep applying pressure to them. And the choices that they make under the immense weight of this pressure reveals who they truly are at their core. And this structure for character development reminds me of the biblical story of Job. And so Job was a pious man, but when the pressure mounted, he began to question God. He felt that God had abandoned him, and he fell into an existential crisis, which seems like an appropriate response given the conditions that Job was in. And under this immense pressure, it was revealed that Job's faith was kind of contingent on the gifts that were bestowed upon him, his easy life. And when the gifts were removed and the pressure was added, his faith kind of folded. And according to Jungian analyst Edward Edinger in his book Ego and Archetype, here, yeah, copy of it here. All right. Um, Job's life's meaning was evidently connected to family, property, and health. When deprived of these, he fell into despair and entered the dark night of the soul. With the loss of almost everything to which he attached value, Job is plunged into an acute state of alienation. If the self is to be recognized as the supreme value, attachment to lesser value must be destroyed. And Edinger describes Job's encounter with God through psychological terms as the individual ego encountering the self, which is the numinous quality in one's being that is in relation to, but beyond the individual ego consciousness. Job's attachment to material things, to what he has, to what is working in his life, prevents him from understanding his relationship to this self. Rather, he lives in a fantasy based on what he has, not who he actually is. And when the pressure mounts and the comforts of his life, the things that he has attached so much value to, are removed, Job comes into a better understanding of who he truly is and what is really important. And in the story, Job seeks meaning in his experience of misfortune, asking, "Why me?" Which I think is a question that we all ask when shit hits the fan. However, another question that one could ask is, what is this doing for me? Or What meaning and lessons does this experience hold for me, and how can this help me to grow? And this is the question at the core of Saturn. How do the limitations and pressures that Saturn applies help us to come into a better understanding of our relationship to ourselves and the world? It ultimately helps us to recognize our limitations and come into a deeper connection with what Jung called the self, which he saw as containing the whole of the individual, including the ego and the shadow and the psyche, and the principle that brings us into connection with our divine nature, which one might see as the soul or the daemon. The pressures that Saturn applies is an invitation to contact this part of ourselves, this core essence, and to evolve the container of the ego, which both holds us as separate individual identities and separates us from connection with the self, which transcends the distortion of isolation that ego consciousness creates. Both the Sun and Saturn are symbols of the ego, but in different ways. The sun is the sense of personal identity. This is who I am. This is me. It is the inner wisdom that burns bright within us and in many ways animates and drives us. It is the essence of the individual self that seeks to shine its light into the world. Saturn is boundaries. It is the sense that I am other or separate from. Saturn's limitations and boundaries create a container that holds us. Saturn contains a lot of fear. It is a planet of death and the limitations of one's life and capabilities. It creates rigid structures to stave off annihilation and the fear of the unknown. It holds tightly to the identity and ego constructs in order to survive. And it can create forms that are too rigid and brittle through clinging and holding tightly to what is known out of fear of the unknown, even if the potential contained in the unknown is possibly better than the low level suffering that we are familiar with. As the Sun and Saturn form this conjunction, these two depictions of the ego meet: what we aspire to be and what we cling to in order to keep us safe. And as Saturn applies pressure to the Sun, what is extraneous and inauthentic becomes revealed. We are asked to turn inward, to connect with the truth of who we are, and to shed the old forms that may no longer support our authentic self, our authentic sense of self, and what we aspire towards. Again, it is through the pressure that Saturn applies that we come into a better understanding of who we truly are at our core. So, returning again to Edward Edinger and his analysis of the book of Job, he says the book of Job is really a record of a divine initiation process, a testing by ordeal, which, when successful, leads to a new state of being. It is analogous to all initiation rituals, which attempt to bring about a transition from one state of consciousness to another. He goes on to say, Job's ordeal represents the urge to individuation, which must break up the psychological status quo in order to bring about a new level of development. With the Sun's conjunction with Saturn, there is an invitation to enter the ordeal in order to break up this status quo, which brings another interesting comparison of Saturn and the Sun. They are both archetypes of authority. The Sun is our inner authority, and Saturn is external authority. Saturn shows us where we have outsourced our authority onto external systems, structures, and figures. The Sun is where we step into our sovereignty and our individual agency. Whoa. Hold on one second. Uh, I have hit a glitch. Please bear with us. All right. Da-da-da-da-da. I apologize, my friends. Um, okay. So, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The Sun is where we step into our sovereignty and our individual agency. In the story of Job, Job doesn't just give up, even after everything he valued was taken from him. He doesn't end up rejecting God. Instead, he questions God and comes into a dialogue with the divine, seeking the meaning behind the events that had impacted his life. And through this dialogue with the divine, God kind of softens and becomes more humanistic, which I think is a really fascinating part of this tale. It is not just the archetypal power or system impacting an individual, but a relationship between the individual and the system, or the ego and the self in psychological terms, where they are learning from and informing each other so that they can both grow. I feel like we are always in relationship with the planets, and the choices we make and the bonds that we form with these archetypes not only inform our lives and personal development, but it also has an impact on the planetary energies themselves. And they can learn from us as much as we are asked to learn from them. And I think that this is kind of an animist way of thinking about astrology, that these are not just abstract forms, but these are living entities that we are in dialogue with and we are in relationship with. And it creates kind of a feedback loop and not just one body acting upon another. And in the story, Job does not just turn his inner authority over to God, even though God is obviously more powerful than him. Instead, he is able to access his personal authority through questioning the meaning behind this series of events. This search for meaning is the basis of logos therapy, which was developed in a concentration camp by Viktor Frankl. His theory was that the meaning that we create about our lives and experiences is fundamental to life. He believed that we cannot always avoid suffering, but we can choose our responses to it and find meaning in it, which allows us ultimately to transcend it in some ways. And he wrote about this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is fantastic. So, as Saturn applies pressure and weight to our lives, it is a call to find meaning in our experience. Frankel says that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And this allows us to tap into and access our inner authority and to use our agency to and to develop an understanding for ourselves, which helps us to manage our responses to the conditions that we find ourselves in, which also allows us to examine the places where we have outsourced that authority. It is comforting in some ways to hand over our authority to others or to external systems, because when things go wrong, we have somebody to blame. And this would be the kind of cursing of God that Job was tempted to do, or blaming something more powerful than ourselves for the situations that we find ourselves in, which is just projecting one's shadow side outward, which, although it might feel good, is ultimately disempowering. And this is often the case, that the structures we exist in are created by forms that hold more power than the individual. However, it is important to recognize where we have the agency to act and what responsibilities that sense of agency demands. Edinger writes, an inflated ego projects the weak shadow side onto others. The process of individuation requires that he, Job, consciously accept and assimilate his dark inferior side. The overall effect of Job's ordeal is to bring about a death and rebirth experience. And this is the recognizing the shadow projections that we create by handing our authority over to others and then blaming them when things don't go well, or holding on to the story that we are blameless, as Job did, and learning to embrace those shadow qualities in order to become a more whole and integrated being, which means taking responsibility for ourselves and our relationship to the larger world. Because with great freedom comes great responsibility, which is one of the lessons that I see kind of encoded in this Sun Saturn conjunction. All right. So, also Wednesday, March 25th. Wednesday's a big day, just by the by. We have the Sun in Aries sextile Pluto in Aquarius. Let me switch my chart over so the folks on the YouTube can see it. All right, so we have the sun up here at 5 degrees and arc minutes of Aries, making this sextile this blue line right here to Pluto in Aquarius at 5 degrees and 6 arc minutes. So this is happening same day as the Sun conjunct Saturn. The Sun has moved slightly away from Saturn, just slightly separating, but still very much in effect. We're going to kind of like talk about both of these aspects in this next section. So, yeah, Sun in Aries, sextile Pluto in Aquarius at 5 degrees and 6 minutes. So, same day that we have the Sun perfecting same day that we have that Sun conjunction with Saturn, same day that we have the Sun conjunct Saturn, we have the Sun perfecting a sextile with Pluto. And a sextile is a supportive aspect. It brings communication and collaboration, but it also takes a little work to activate. And Pluto is subtle. As the lord of the underworld, Pluto rules over what is invisible, what lies beneath the surface of life. The sun occupies the space of the day world. It brings illumination, clarity, and logic. It shines the light of the rational mind on things and reveals what is hidden. The sun is the source of life and therefore is a symbol of life. However, according to archetypal psychologist James Hillman from his book Dream in the Underworld, which I have right here in this other pile of books, also excellent book, kind of complicated, but he says a lot of really good stuff, and I love James Hillman. Anyway, he says in Dream in the Underworld, what one knows about life may not be relevant for what is below life. The sun and Pluto live in two different realms. The sun lives in the realm of the sky world, the world of the aspirational. It seeks to create coherence through identity and what can be known. Pluto lives beneath the earth in the realm of the invisible. It is a symbol of decay where coherence breaks apart. However, there is an interesting relationship between the sun and Pluto, the upper world and the underworld, life and death. They are two sides of the same coin. One is generative, the other degenerative. And Hillman speaks about this relationship in reference to the kinship between Zeus and Hades in Greek mythology. He says, the brotherhood between Zeus and Hades says upper and lower worlds are the same, only the perspectives differ. There is only one in the same universe, coexistent and synchronous. But one brother's view sees it from above, through the light, and the other from below, into its darkness. Hades' realm is contiguous with life, touching it at all points, just below it. It is the shadow brother, or doppelganger, giving to life its depth and psyche. So we have the light half, the sun, which seeks to make all things clear and visible, coming into a supportive connection with the dark half, Pluto, which is invisible and brings depth to life. There is also another relationship between the sun and the underworld. In the Egyptian cosmology, Ra, the sun god, travels through the sky each day, and at night, when the sun sets, Ra travels through the underworld in his solar bark and battles Apop, the demon of chaos. So each night, the sun goes through an initiation in the underworld, where it tries to maintain order and coherence in the land of disorder and disintegration. And each morning, it is reborn anew. And one of my favorite astrologers, Diana Rose Harper, who's also maybe one of the most intelligent people I've ever met, said that the sun is a chthonic god. And I was like, what? And she pointed out that the sun works in the sky, but it lives under the earth. You know, when its work is done, it goes home under the earth in the chthonic realm. And I think that this is a brilliant perspective on the sun. And so we see these several underworld connections to the sun, which may be drawn out with this sextile to Pluto. It might bring us, and it might bring us in closer contact with our internal and interior world. The sun in the sextile might help illuminate the invisible realms of Pluto, and Pluto might help bring the sun into deeper relationship with the depths of the psyche and the invisible motivations that are operating below the surface of our conscious lives. James Hillman goes on to say, we may believe we are living life only on the level of life, but we cannot not escape the psychic significance of what we are doing. Soul is made in the root of the world. What has meaning for life has meaning for soul at the same moment. So consider you're living in the light of Hades within it. So, what does it mean to live in the light of Hades? What illumination comes from below? What light can shine from the upside down? And what can that reveal about our life, about who we are, and at its core, what does it illuminate about our soul that is constantly being formed in the depths of the underworld? Hillman says Pluto especially is important to recognize in our euphemistic references to the unconscious as a giver of wholeness, a storehouse of abundant riches, a place not of fixation and torment, but a place, if appropriated rightly, offers fertile plenty. As we shine a light into the invisible world within, perhaps it brings awareness to the hidden parts of ourselves. And as we sit with what is revealed in the depths of the underworld, perhaps it provides access to the riches of the psyche and the soul, and the wisdom of the inner hidden world, which can then inform the conscious life and help us to update our sense of the solar self, how we shine our light into the world. The sun's relationship to the underworld through this sextile may help to enrich the gold that the sun carries with it. But this occurs through the turning towards what is hidden and difficult in order to gain access to the riches that Pluto offers. And it is important to remember that the shadow never really goes away. They just shift as we move the source of light. And the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. So Pluto is also a planet of initiation. And with the sun moving from the conjunction with Saturn to the sextile with Pluto, I'm reminded of the story of Baba Yaga and Vasilisa the Beautiful, which is a Russian fairy tale of initiation and getting in touch with one's inner knowing. So I'm just going to regale you with this tale for a moment. So Vasilisa is sent by her wicked stepmother to go and retrieve fire from the witch Baba-Yaga, who lives in the heart of the dark woods. And so already this is a journey into the interior, into the strange and foreign depths of the wilds that live in the dark core. Vasilisa carries with her a wooden doll that was given to her by her mother before she died. Her mother's instructions were, whenever Vasilisa didn't know what to do, to feed the doll and to give it water. So Vasilisa sets out into the heart of the dark wood with her doll to go find this ancient witch and to retrieve fire, or the light that lives in the dark, that burns deep within, which can only be accessed after we face our fears and go through the initiation process. Baba Yaga is also known as the Bone Mother, which is very Saturnian. Saturn rules bones and also old age and elders. And Baba Yaga is an old witch who lives in a house that stands on chicken legs, surrounded by the bones of the people that she has destroyed and eaten. And so Vasilisa, this young innocent girl, shows up and asks Baba Yaga for some fire. And the witch says that Vasilisa must complete several tasks before she will give her the fire. But if she fails to complete them, Baba Yaga will eat her. So the first task is to separate the mildewed corn from the good corn before Baba Yaga returns from her nightly outing. She points Vasilisa to a massive pile of corn and then flies off on her mortar and pestle to do whatever she does. So Vasilisa has a minor freak out, thinking there is no way this could ever be possible, and she's probably going to end up wasting her last hours on Earth in a pile of rotten corn before she becomes dinner for the witch. But she remembers her doll and the words of her mother. So she feeds the doll, and Vasilisa is freaking out, and the doll says, "Just go eat some food and go to sleep. Don't worry about this. I'll take care of it." And so Vasilisa eats some soup and goes to sleep, and in the morning she wakes up and the corn has all been sorted. When Baba Yaga returns, she was impressed and a little dismayed because she wasn't going to be able to go to eat this kid. But she sent Vasilisa on another task. She points to a mound of dirt, and she told Vasilisa to separate all of the poppy seeds out from the dirt that they're buried in. And then she flies off in her mortar and pestle. Again, Vasilisa feeds the doll, and again, the doll tells her to get some rest, and in the morning, the work is done. When Baba Yaga returns, she is low key shocked and gives Vasilisa fire contained in a human skull and tells her to bring it home. And there are a bunch of other components of the story, which I don't really have time to go into here. But if you want to learn more about it, there's a really good chapter in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with Wolves, which I reference for this. And also, Back from the Borderline uses this story in her episode on intuition and logic. And a great episode, and I highly recommend it. And it's also a great podcast. Anyway, the reason I'm telling the story here is that with the sun moving between Saturn and Pluto on Wednesday, there is an invitation to initiation. The journey into the depths to confront the shadow and to retrieve the light that lives in the dark core guarded by the Bone Mother, who's the only one who can bestow the light through the successful completion of the tasks that are presented to us or the pressure that Saturn brings. And I think about the sun's conjunction with Saturn here because of these tasks from Baba Yaga. And they create a lot of pressure. And Vasilisa cannot complete them using logic and the rationale that the sun brings. She must turn inward and connect with her intuition, which is represented by her feeding the doll. Another form of the inner light. That intuitive knowing represented by the doll can be viewed as the inner spiritual wisdom of the sun. The series of impossible tasks shows up in all sorts of stories, from Cupid and Psyche to Rumpelstiltskin. It is a process of allowing the intuitive wisdom the space to be able to solve and sort out complex problems that baffle the logical mind and that seem impossible to accomplish under normal conditions. This intuitive wisdom in the story is activated by the weight that is placed upon Vasilisa by the trials and the ordeals that Baba Yaga brings. This is also the meeting with the shadow in the form of a cannibalistic witch, which provides access for Vasilisa's inner knowing. This tracks with the sun's sextile with Pluto and the going into the dark and facing our fears in order to gain access to the fire of wisdom which burns there. This is an invitation to personal power and knowledge, which again can only be granted through connection with the intuition, which is an invisible quality that must be fed like Vasilisa's doll. The intuition is the doppelganger of logic, is the deep, rich knowing which exists at the heart of our being, but it is counter to the rational logic of the solar consciousness. It lives in the dark core of the self and must be nurtured in order to build trust with it, so it can offer its gifts and help us through difficult challenges. Just as Vasilisa must face the shadow in the form of Baba Yaga, we must turn inward and face the unknown within ourselves to access the internal light of our intuition and to trust the qualities that it brings in order to survive the ordeals that the world presents us with. And this is the invitation that is offered to us during the middle part of the week. Pretty exciting. All right. Moving right along to Thursday, March the 26th, and we have Venus in Aries conjunct Chiron in Aries, and this is occurring at 25 degrees and 24 arc minutes. So let me switch the chart here. All right. So over here, 25 minutes or 25 degrees, 24 arc minutes of Aries, we have Venus and Chiron meeting up. All right. So Chiron represents core wounds. Venus is a planet that deals with love, relationship, and beauty. When they come into this conjunction, it can activate some core wounds in the Venusian areas of life. This may create feelings of self-doubt around how we look or how we feel in our bodies, wounds around beauty and aesthetics, which may be connected to earlier times in life and the stories we created during periods where we might have experienced rejection or other forms of wounding based on our appearance. And these stories might get kicked up again during this transit, which may feel uncomfortable. But Chiron's relationship with the wound is to be able to recognize it in order to work through it when it gets activated and emerges from the depths of our internal world. As these stories come to the surface, it gives us an opportunity to rework and reorder these stories. This allows us to clear the emotional charge that is tied to them and develop a new narrative that is more appropriate to who we are now based on what we have learned through our past experiences of life. Chiron's core wounds come from abandonment and betrayal. He was abandoned by both of his parents and betrayed by his friend and student Hercules, who accidentally shot him with an arrow dipped in the poison blood of the Hydra. As Venus conjuncts Chiron, the wounds of betrayal and abandonment or rejection may come up in the Venusian realms of love and relationship. These are painful wounds, and they activate the Hydra poison, which causes the wound to fester. The Hydra is a many headed monster. When one head was cut off, two more would grow back in its place. And I think this is very similar to how negative thoughts arise. We get a thought or a germ, a negative thought loop, and when we try to shut it down or cut off its head, two more stories arise, and then we try and cut those back, and four more stories arise. The Hydra has poison breath and poison blood, which has no cure. When we become infected by this poison, it can lay dormant in our system until we get a little bit of information that activates the poisonous story that lives in our blood. And then that poison comes alive, and the Hydra rears all of its hideous heads, and it starts running the show. Our minds are attuned to look for danger. And when we see something that reads as threat, it activates all the circuits of our mind that try to prevent danger and minimize that threat. And so when we see something that could look like heartbreak or rejection or abandonment, our attachment system kicks in and our body responds by trying to defend ourselves against the fear of disconnection. We can shut down or go into a fawn response or go into fight or flight. And as Venus conjuncts Chiron, it can kick up our attachment wounds and cause different forms of insecure attachment to show up. Our attachment system is formed in early childhood. When we are small, we need our caregivers to attune to us in order to care for us and to take care of our survival needs because we are babies and can't do that for ourselves. And in this early stage of life, disconnection equals death. How our caregivers respond to our need for attention and care forms our attachment system. This then plays out through interpersonal relationships later in life. If we think our needs are not going to be met by a caregiver, then the options are to shut down and pretend that we don't have any needs and to develop a story that needs are dumb, other people are untrustworthy, and if we want something done, we have to do it ourselves, and this is avoidant attachment. Or we can have an anxious attachment, which comes out of a situation where a child learns that if their need isn't met, they can scream louder to get attention and receive the care that they need. This attachment style doesn't trust that there will be enough available for them, that it might go away. So they develop a hyperactive attachment system, and it can create hyper attunement to what other people are doing in order to make sure that the attachment needs are met. It can be challenging to actually take in the love and connection that is desired because there is a lack of trust that this love and care will be consistent or that it'll be enough. It tells the story that love, care, and connection is inconsistent, and I need to make sure that I'm tracking what's going on so that life-giving energy of connection isn't withdrawn. With Chiron and Venus coming together, these relational attachment stories can become activated. And again, this can bring us into deeper awareness of the story we are telling or the program that we are running so that we can work on clearing it out and practice telling a new story. One way of doing this is through the context of relationship with people we love and trust. And this doesn't need to be intimate partnership. We can do this with friends and people we feel safe with. We are wounded in relationships, so we need relationship to heal. The container of safe relationship can help us to rewrite old narratives and cross reference the old stories we are telling ourselves with the actual evidence that we are receiving from the relationships that we are currently engaged in. And this can also be practiced through our relationship with ourselves and the way that we treat ourselves. And this could look like noticing negative self talk and that replicates and reinforces old stories or the things that were said to us. So, can we notice where we want to go into self criticism, self blame, self judgment, where these things arise? Can we practice softening towards ourselves and being kind? Can we practice accepting ourselves instead of looking at the flaws and failures? Can we look at the successes and what we have achieved and how far we have come? Can we try and observe the ways that old wounds might be running the show in our relational life? And can we work to shift those patterns little by little? Can we practice kindness, compassion, and acceptance with ourselves? And can we show up for ourselves in these ways? And in the ways that we want other people to show up for us, like an ideal partner or an ideal parent. This is an opportunity to give ourselves the care and compassion that we may have been seeking, that we might have been seeking from a parent or a caregiver who may have been unable to provide that due to whatever conditions they were dealing with in their life at that time. So perhaps we can also treat ourselves in the ways that we want a partner or a friend to see us and to show up for us. Instead of reaching outward to fill a need, um, can we first see if we can meet that need for ourselves? And not in the avoidant attachment story that no one got me, so I have to take care of myself, but to try and care for the wound on an internal level by creating more spaciousness and providing care and compassion instead of seeking some external solution to an internal problem. And by learning to love ourselves in all of our messiness, we are able to show up more fully for all of the relationships that we are engaged in our life. And Gina Maria, I'll read the comments at the end because I'm kind of on a roll and I want to make sure that I get through all of this. So if folks have comments or questions in the chat, stick on for a minute at the end and I'll go back through everything. Which brings us to our last transit of the week. Let me fill up my cup. So on Saturday, March the 28th, we have Saturn in Aries, sextile Pluto in Aquarius. This is occurring at 5 degrees and 9 arc minutes. Let me go to the chart. All right. So here we have Saturn over there in Aries, forming this sextile with Pluto over here in Aquarius. You can see that sextile is that blue line right there. The sun just separating from that sextile with Pluto, as well as the conjunction with Saturn. So this sextile, my friends, is the first aspect that Saturn and Pluto have made since the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which occurred on January the 12th of 2020. So Saturn is a planet of structure and Pluto is a planet of disintegration. It reveals what is rotten and asks us to strip away and compost what is no longer functioning to make space for what needs to emerge. And so collectively, we are living in the aftermath of the Pluto Saturn conjunction, which manifested as the COVID-19 pandemic, which also revealed structural rot in institutions and order and the ordering systems of our world. Issues around government control, structural racism, wealth inequality, and climate catastrophe came to the surface and demanded to be addressed. In many ways, that series of events paved the way for the reality that we are currently living in. And now Pluto and Saturn come into their first aspect since that conjunction, which happens to be a supportive aspect, a sextile. And while they are still carrying the energy of their conjunction, this sextile may help to stabilize things in some way because it is a harmonious aspect. The structural rot that gets exposed may be less jarring than it was in 2020. And ideally, we can begin to construct ways of dealing with the decay of existing systems instead of doubling down and the systems of control trying to cling tighter to what they are holding in the nihilistic death cult that they are bringing forward. This sextile may be a time of austerity and bring a sense of scarcity, a time when external pressure mounts to reveal internal workings as well as their failings. This may bring a reordering of how things function at both an invisible and visible level. Saturn wants to maintain order and to hold to the status quo, while Pluto is a chthonic archetype that creates change through subterranean forces. Things operating below the surface in the underworld, both actual and metaphorical. These invisible forces have a lot of power to shape the landscape, and it is up to Saturn whether to resist these forces or to create structures where this powerful energy can be channeled and utilized. This may require a loss of control in some ways, and a giving up of the outdated forms and the reliance on the status quo. Saturn doesn't really want to do this, but it might have no choice. This sextile is a point of integration following that Saturn Pluto conjunction of 2020. So we may want to consider what we have learned from that time period, what we have learned from COVID, what issues have been revealed that still need to be addressed. And this goes for our internal world as much as it does for the external world. And again, it's easy to project all of this outward and say, well, these people aren't doing this, or this politician let me down, or whatever. But we don't have much control over that. What we do have some control over, just a little bit, is our behavior, our actions, and how we respond or react to things. So we may want to begin looking at the ways we have integrated the lessons of the 2020 conjunction and the subsequent pandemic. What have we learned from that experience? How can we use that knowledge to move forward in our lives? And use that information to readjust the structures we are creating for ourselves to come into better relationship with the powerful forces of the underworld, which manifest through urges, impulses, and unconscious drives. What is the container that we have created to hold and channel these desires and the survival drives and fears that Pluto represents, and that Saturn seeks to repress in order to keep and maintain the status quo? So, what is the communication that can occur between the prevailing order and the deep need for transformation? How can these two principles support each other at this tenuous time? So, in Greek mythology, Kronos, Saturn, swallowed Hades or Pluto along with all of his other children, with the exception of Zeus. Kronos does this to suppress the threat that Hades and all of his siblings, who are representation of psychological forces, pose to the order that Kronos has created. Another way of looking at this is perhaps Kronos does this to keep these energies safe and to incubate the power of Hades until the time is right for it to be unleashed, waiting for the conditions to be right for the power of the underworld to reshape the order of the day world. With this sextile, we have the principles of order and disorder coming into communication. And so, what do they say to each other? Saturn tries to maintain order, and Pluto brings disintegration and transformation. The sextile is an opportunity to kind of reconcile these differences and to find some form of harmony between these opposing viewpoints. And I'm not quite sure how this will play out, but stay tuned to the sky to watch how this unfolds for the collective. and stay connected to your inner world. And just notice the places where you may be clinging to some old forms of order and ask yourself if these structures are still relevant or if they're still serving you. Or are there places where you can let these outdated structures go and compost them to make more space for what can come next and to give a little room to allow yourself to grow into what you can become? And with that, my friends, that brings us to the end of another exciting episode of This Week in Space. Um, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Again, I will take a few minutes at the end to check the chat. And if anyone has any questions or thoughts, please pop them in there. And yeah, we can dialogue about it for a minute. Um, I don't know what I got to say. Oh, one thing I have to say is I also do a astrology themed radio show called the Melee Report, which comes out for the new and full moons. I put one out last week for the Pisces new moon, and if you're on Instagram, there's a link to that in in my bio. I will throw a link to that in the show notes on the podcast and the YouTube. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. Great playlist. It also talks about a lot of the astrology of last week, as well as the Sun Saturn conjunction. So still relevant, still fresh. Yeah, check that out. You can also go to my SoundCloud, Camp Wizard Camp at SoundCloud. And yeah, that's all the astro weather that is fit to print, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's exciting edition of This Week in Space. Again, my name is Joan Emerson Bell. I am a consulting astrologer and tarot reader. If you're interested in getting a reading and having a conversation, you can hit me up on Instagram at Blind Stallion Space Wizard, or you can go to my website, campwizardcamp.com, and yeah, holler at your wizard. Okay, good people. Again, I'm taking next week off because Jonah need a vacation, but I will be back in 2 weeks' time with all the astro weather that you need to navigate the week in space with some style and grace. Until next time, my friends, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye now.